Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about machine learning and how to optimize your machine learning deployment. To discuss that, I'm joined by a major industry expert. With me is Abhijit Bose, Head of Enterprise Machine Learning and AI Engineering at Capital One. Abhijit, happy Friday to you, and very good to have you with us today.
Happy Friday to you, James. Great to be here.
So, machine learning and ML ops, obviously it's a very, very hot category these days. I think the term ML ops gets thrown around and not everyone knows what it means. ML ops, machine learning to enhance operations. What are your nutshell definition of ML ops?
I would say ML ops focuses on the end-to-end life cycle of a model, starting from when you develop the model, train the model, validate, implement, test it. Even like when you deploy it in production, monitor and manage the model, like refit in production, for example. So it looks at entire life cycle, and then one of the goals is to first develop a highly repeatable process for all of those steps that I mentioned earlier. Starting from when you start calculating the features all the way to, keeping the model running in production. The second goal is to really hide the infrastructure of all of the machinery, like all the CPUs, GPUs, all of the workflow solutions that we have to build into a machine learning platform from our data scientists and the end users, so that they can focus on the model and the science, and not worry about like resiliency and if a GPU fails, how am I gonna restart my model in production and all of that. And the final goal would be to develop MLOps in such a way that it scales along with the number of models and the number of users, so that scaling the ML operation for a company is also very important. So I would say those are the three big goals for having a successful MLOps operation.
One of those pieces seemed really interesting, the idea of sort of hiding the technology, so to speak, so that the users don't need to worry about that. So they're getting the advantage of it without needing to deal with the nuts and bolts of it. Am I correct in thinking that? Yeah.
Absolutely. Like in many machine learning environments, often a scientist has to know what kind of instance on AWS you're going to use, what type of GPUs, how much memory you need, or kind of details of a workflow solution, which are different than actual like modeling pipeline or data pipeline that people use. So in our platform, for example, we use of a more abstract or more higher level language that they can develop, and then all of the infrastructure details are actually hidden, done under the hood. As soon as they are ready to deploy or they want to run a big training job, it just starts automatically without them understanding a lot of the underlying infrastructure that you need to host.
Well, let's talk about MLOps' place in the market. I mean, as you survey the enterprise IT market, how would you describe the current MLOps adoption? Is it infancy? Is it really moving towards a mainstream? How many people are really using MLOps heavily?
I would say it's been it's a emerging field. There is a lot of work that's still going on. But what I would say is that to really leverage MLOps effectively, first we have to make sure we have a great data infrastructure. And as a lot of companies are starting to move to the cloud, or they may have a lot of hybrid environments, like some data would be in the cloud, some would be on their on-prem systems.
Right.
If I was a data scientist, that's a hard kind of infrastructure to work with. Like half of my data would be here, and for my next project, something could be on the cloud. So to really effectively leverage, machine learning, the first thing to do is to really build a great data infrastructure, be on the cloud. As in case of Capital One, we are probably one of the, definitely one of the first, but probably still one of the only financial companies that are running, or enter operation from the public cloud from AWS. So everything that we build, is on public cloud. We have access to a lot of our, a lot of the AWS platforms, our own platforms. That just makes it a little bit easier, for us to move to machine learnings. And that's why, like, the first few years were data transformation for us. But as soon as we built that great set up data platforms, really it was like machine learning just unleashed in the company. And then more and more we are creating centralized platforms for machine learning, central MLOps, set of tools and processes, and even like a lot of the, automating a lot of the data and ML model governance, with still, human in the loop, centralized. And so for us, it's been a journey, but I would say like we are probably on the cutting edge of MLOps, probably ahead, in this area. And as you probably know, like we recently wrote worked with Harvard Business Review on a white paper on MLOps, and kind of listing some of the best practices and things that we learned, and across the industry what we are seeing.
Yeah, I definitely want to get to that because I think, you being ahead of the curve, I'd like to sort of mine your expertise to see, what we can help people with. I mean, let's first talk about some of the challenges the companies face as they spin up their MLOps instances. I mean, what are some typical challenges that companies run into when they try to really leverage machine learning operations?
I would say like the data is still the biggest challenge, for most companies. And by data, I mean like, not having standardization, a customer ID might be specified like 10 different ways across 10 different, tables, for example. Ease of use in the data, and then often, a lot of organizations, they need to adopt like sound frameworks, sound set of tools for governance, for access, like essentially to like one of the biggest challenge in this space, I see that, like the data might be at the top. They also need to make sure that data scientists are using a set of consistent platforms and tools, not just data, but for example, to build a great machine learning model and to operationalize it, you need to also have a great feature store, feature platforms, where people can compute, experiment with different features, and be able to move that to production. With appropriate governance, and with appropriate deployment gates.
Do you mean, sorry to interrupt you, but when you say feature, you mean like tool sets? What?
It's in our case, it's we are building a platform, which means there are libraries, there are SDKs, there are APIs, and there are tools. To just manage features that go into our machine learning systems, both in development as well as in production. The other, challenge, I would say that we have been working hard to establish a set of what I would call well-managed, human-centered processes. For example, model governance, model risk. A set of controls on the data, things that we do, for example, when a model is ready, it has to be peer reviewed, by legal, by fair lending, or for, other folks, the model risk office, for example. We do a lot of like bias mitigation, on our data and the model architecture. We are even building some of the tools where it's part of the platform where you build a model, and then the tool itself will generate a report, that will give you instantly, as the data scientist or a machine learning scientist building the model, window into, into bias and, other like explainability, for example. So those are there is a lot of friction in a lot of companies to getting those things, in place, both in terms of standardization, automation, a set of tooling. That can also be a big challenge. Um, and then, this whole space of governance, responsible AI, that's also a big topic these days. Just because I can build a model doesn't mean, I want to actually do it.
Right.
So keeping humans in the loop, and, how best to kind of balance that human and automation, figuring out the boundaries and the right set of controls. Those are all part of challenges that MLOps, seek to solve, and different companies are in different kind of stages in their journey.
Yeah, clearly the explainability piece, it seems like it's getting more and more attention these days. Companies want to know, and consumers want to know why did I get approved for the loan or not get approved for the loan? That's definitely an issue. But if someone would come to you and say, Abhijit, we want to get started on this, what are some best practices we should keep in mind for ML ops? What are a few best practices? Like, definitely do this as you build your ML ops practice.
Yeah, so what I would say is that a set of practices with certain, I would say like five like distinct outcomes. How you actually incorporate those practices, might be a little different from company to company, but in general, one of the outcomes that a best practice should address is to be able to deploy machine learning models consistently. If I build a fraud model today and I deploy it to production, the next version of that fraud model, should follow the exact same process. Should use the same type of data. If there was a change in the data, that should be reflected. We know that deliberate change in data feed happened. So it's that consistency and the rigor in the process. That should be one of the best practices. Like, I would look into all of the processes surrounding that and make sure, which ones are not consistent, for example. Then, a set of controls to monitor the model and all of the features, feeding into that model, for drift, for any kind of quality issues that happen, whether it's an upstream data issue. So monitoring and control of the data and features, and and even the model execution environment. That's definitely one of the best practice to make sure that happens. And then be able to retrain a machine learning model in production with very high confidence. And this is really important for a lot of our fraud models, for example, that are doing millions of decisions on transactions, like credit card authorization and credit card fraud models. They make millions of decisions every week, maybe even sometimes every day. So be able to just retrain that model every day. For example, if a fraud model gets trained every week, every day, every month, that happens automatically, and you have a set of controls around that to make sure every time it's trained, it's following, it maintains its accuracy, for example. Having a set of controls around that. And then
ask about that before we're going. That's an interesting one. And the retraining is that, so that it's being retrained because more data is fed into it, or a better set of compliance rules.
It's a new data that's coming in. So for example, you might build a model, every month that takes in the long-term patterns in the data, that learns longer-term patterns.
Right.
In things like fraud, things change much faster. There are fraud trends, especially in the digital world. There may be fraud vectors that evolve every day. So to keep up, you also train another model, and it varies from, use case to use case. But if you train it every day, taking in the new data for that day, you update the daily patterns. But then, the model should behave properly, and it should maintain the accuracy that you are seeing. And if there is any issue with that, you might be training a model every day, but it's actually accuracy is going down if you're not having a proper set of controls. And
Okay. Makes sense.
yeah, and then go ahead.
I was going to say, I want to make sure we get all the best practices. Was there one more in there? I'm not sure, whatever.
Yeah. The only other thing I would say is that the ML infrastructure has to be resilient. For example, like if a machine goes down, there is another machine that spins up, and we get alerted, and then in some cases, we would even automatically fix it through another agent, so that resilience is very important, along with all of the cyber, vulnerability scanning. For example, every model, you can think of it as as code that we are deploying in production. We don't want vulnerabilities and to kind of creep into our production environment. So you need to have good practices there as well.
Makes sense. Well, I think that the big question that people really wonder about is the future of ML ops. I mean, how can companies prepare now, or what are some key milestones we can expect in the years ahead? If you look into your crystal ball, what do you see, Abhijit?
I would say, a few things. Today, close to 90% of machine learning models that are developed in companies never see the light of day in production. That's according to one of the surveys that IDC did. I think this year. I mean that's a pretty large number. Like 90% of the models, never get deployed.
Do you know why that is true? Because they're faulty. Why are they not used?
It's a variety of things that we already discussed. Not having like right infrastructure. They may have built a model, using a set of ad hoc processes, for data that they gathered, but there is no way to get that data into a production environment properly, and then every day, for example, the model needs to be trained. Whatever, there are a whole range of reasons why that happens.
Right.
Like when I read that number, it was like, wow, like that's so much value at the table and so much effort that goes into
Right.
developing and training, and frankly, it's also employee happiness, right? If I have we have lots of data scientists who are building and who are extremely bright. They have a lot of ideas, but if you can get them to production, those ideas, they will get disillusioned with work. So I see a lot of companies exploring MLOps today, much more this year. I have seen the field kind of growing by leaps and bounds, and everybody's trying to figure out. The other thing I would say is that wherever companies have invested in MLOps, they also see close to tenfold increase in productivity. Just like the 90% number, like if you did MLOps, you will see a much bigger payoff in terms of like faster model training, faster deployment, a lot more in ROI of the data science practice. So I think eventually, MLOps would be absolutely essential to just to enable and demonstrate the power of machine learning and really kind of bringing machine learning to the enterprise. And then, it's still early days, so we are doing, a bunch of tooling. We are building a lot of stuff. I do expect, a lot of companies and startups will start to address like enterprise grade MLOps. And have much more capabilities in place so that we don't have to do a lot of the things that we do today, but still we can move up the stack and focus on more data science and less of an MLOps at the infrastructure level.
Right. Obviously, I think you said it. It's going to be a fascinating sector to follow. A lot of changes in the years ahead, I'm sure. And thank you so much for sharing your insight today. Hope you come back and talk with us again sometime.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you.